Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel Review Anything and Everything. And today we are actually taking a look at the DC Comics Encyclopedia New Edition. Now, I had a chance to briefly run through this, and see the artist here, Jim Lee, who's a very known, popular artist from back in the days in the 90s. Um, if I had that name correctly and I remember correctly. And this book actually has a lot of good things about it in terms of giving you some basic detail on different characters and whatnot. And I feel that with DC Comics, there's never been a lot of solid pieces of information, at least that I know of. I mean, I might be new to the space in terms of I know Marvel's made their encyclopedia and made various forms of versions for them single books, and I've seen like a collection of books for their kind of encyclopedia, so different things. Now, maybe I just haven't been in tune with the DC one as much, but at taking a look at this, I think it's really good in terms of giving you a brief understanding of most characters, a little bit of background. It shows the powers listed here, as well as some of their basic pedigree information, which is nice. Now, the only thing I'm going to say in regards to the book that is, I'm not going to say whether or not to say it's a negative necessarily, because I know a lot of books don't put what I'm about to say into the mix, though Marvel has done this before. And that is the fact that in DC's book, or at least this book, I can't speak for any other books that they may have ever had, um, you don't get stats, you don't get statistics. And for me, I've been someone who, when it comes to this space, I've always been very big on, having statistics inside some kind of informational book for comic characters. Now, it's not a big deal because I know that most books don't have that. So in that regards, I guess you would say that it's fair comparative to other similar books. But being that Marvel has always had their stat system since maybe about 1990 or 1991, somewhere in that ballpark range, they came out with their stat system that they created. Um, they would carry that over onto a lot of their encyclopedias. And the thing about it is, or their Marvel handbook, which is also kind of a version of encyclopedia. So they have encyclopedia and then they have the handbook. But for the reference of this video, if I say encyclopedia, that means any of their, references to give, a collection of characters and their powers like this book. And they would always adopt their power scale system into their books of information and their encyclopedias. Now, it doesn't mean that it's 100% accurate, because the truth is that they kind of fell away from the standard that they had when they first introduced it, where everybody's powers are reflected in their stats correctly, where later on they started just kind of throwing stats around that didn't necessarily reflect that. So in a way, it almost made the whole scaling system not even really make that much sense, unless certain characters' powers evolved. But for the most part, the way you traditionally knew them, it wasn't necessarily accurately reflected. But my point to it was that at least they had a system that was in there, and they didn't reflect all their stats. They have a total of 9 stats that they would put in. And those stats are, if I can remember correctly, strength, speed, agility, stamina, durability, intelligence, um, mental powers, energy projection, and fighting ability. Now they would have this in a lot of their cards. Now, when they would put it in their encyclopedia, they wouldn't have all 9 stats. They would usually just have 6 at a time, and it usually would be, depending on the ones that they put there in that specific media or that specific book. But at least you had a reference of stats. Now, like I said, this book is great for information on the characters. It gives a little, rundown of the characters' powers, which is fine, just to kind of give you a sense of, okay, what's this person's powers? But here, if I go to a character with powers and we say Black Adam, for example, it says powers and abilities: immortality, super speed, strength, endurance, invulnerability, flight, magical enhanced perceptions and intellect, teleportation, self healing, and the ability to instantly heal others in infinity for magic. Now, the thing about it when it comes to this is the thing about it is when it comes to this is it gives you that sense of his power list, which is fine. The problem is that you don't know how that fares in relation to somebody else. So, for example, over here we have Bizarro, and it says super strength, speed, flight, and vulnerability, enhanced breath, and vision capabilities. What does all that mean? We know that both of them have super strength. Um, well, one says Bizarro says super strength. Um, Black Adam says super speed and comma strength endurance, maybe implying super strength after you're saying super speed rather than continuously saying super strength, super endurance. You just have super in front of the first set and then just continue with strength, endurance, and vulnerability, where it's supposed to mean super strength, endurance. Now we all know Black Adam, and we know that he is relatively the same stats somewhat as Superman. And here, Bizarro's, it's kind of great that they're right next to each other because we all understand that Bizarro is also somebody who is has obviously Superman type of stats as well. But the thing about it is when you read it, there's really no really understanding to say the difference. Super strength. He has strength, it says, but we'll assume that means super strength. Otherwise, it wouldn't be put there. He has speed, flight. He has speed, flight too. How fast is that? What does that mean? We don't really know these things. So I'm not saying this to necessarily knock the book, but I'm saying it to say that most books are written out like this, encyclopedias for superhero content, even though Marvel will probably throw in a little stat bar, which, like I said previously, may not even necessarily be accurate. But it does kind of give you a sense of, and the stats go from 1 to 7, will give you a sense of like, okay, this guy's strength is maybe a 5, while this other guy's strength is a 7. And it gives you a sense of, okay, when they say super strength is one of his powers, I get an idea of what the difference is. Of course, you would then have to know what those stats actually mean, which back in the days when they used to have a card system for Marvel, those stats were written out because they used to have trading cards, and the trading cards had those stats on the back of them in their second series set of cards, along with um, 3 cards that had let you know what those stats actually meant, what they quantified to. And for that time that had 6 stats on it. And then later on, they made other ones that introduced energy rejection, mental, and fighting came later. And those they later had things that translated what that meant as well. So, but with that being said, DC never made anything like that. They never made anything like that. So one, you never got to see that from some previous media, nor do you see it in their encyclopedias. Um, so I just want to make note of that because I think this is a wealth of information for just informing you on, who these characters is, their background, their power set, but it's not going to quantify to you what those powers, what those powers actually mean. Now, also, and in addition to that, um, I want to add this as a separate source of media, and I was going to actually put this. So, link is going to be in the description for this book for you to purchase it on Amazon, affiliated link. You can check it out. And I think it's, like I said, I think it's a great purchase because I personally don't have a lot of DC content books as I do Marvel, as I feel Marvel is always more available. I could be wrong. Maybe I just wasn't looking for DC in that way, but this one kind of popped up on the surface and it was like, okay, this is available. But I really want to make note that um, there was a previous book that was based off of a game system. If anyone's familiar with the game system Mutants and Masterminds, which I want to say came out originally about in the 90s. And it was like loosely based off the structure of the system, based off a Dungeons and Dragons. At a later point in time, they updated the system to third edition, which actually reflected more to those original Marvel stats in terms of, so the original Mutants and Mastermind started with, and I'm digressing here a little bit, but I can get to my point. It originally started with 6 stats, similar to Dungeons and Dragons. If you're familiar with the stats in Dungeons and Dragons, I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but I think it's like strength, dexterity, um, some type of like physical durability. I'm forgetting what it constitution. Um, and some form of intelligence and wisdom and charisma. So I know one of them I may have said it wrong, but they represent that. So 6 stats of that. What the third edition of Mutants and Masterminds did had made it more in line with almost like the traditional Marvel stats, where you had strength, um, you had dexterity, but then you had agility as a separate stat, because those things are really two different things. You had some form of, I think it's endurance. Essentially, you had eight stats that reflected things relative to strength, dexterity, agility, wisdom, intelligence, charisma, um, and fighting, and a few other things. But essentially, they came up to a total of like eight stats, and very close to the nine stats of Marvels. I don't remember them all at the moment, but essentially, you can look that up. But essentially, what I'm getting at is that, so at the same time they made that third edition, they also made a DC version, and in that DC version, which actually I think came either at the same time or slightly before, the hardcover came out before they made the hardcover of the um, third edition Mutants and Masterminds, write up, which is their own kind of universe. Instead, they made the DC one right up first. And the DC one was the first time ever that I know of, and I've been pretty familiar with a lot of that came out in reference to DC, lore and giving you information like encyclopedias. And it was the first time that they had stats for DC characters. Yes, it was in the form of a game, which they needed to give you stats because it was a game, but nonetheless, it was the first time you had stats. And the stats didn't necessarily equate to exactly what somebody was capable of doing. Like, for example, they had Superman being able to lift, if I'm not mistaken, it was like 200,000 tons. But what the point was is that it gave a reference point to say, well, if he's this strong, they had Doomsday lifting 400,000 tons. Maybe Superman in the real comic continuum can lift more than that amount. But it gave you a range to say, well, this is what he is, and Doomsday is higher than him. It would let you know, like, okay, but this is where Batman is. This is where Wonder Woman is. And it gave you a kind of sense of scale to each other. Even if the actual measurements wasn't exactly correct, it gave you a scale in terms of where everyone was in relation to each other. So it did give you that sense. And I will put the link inside the description down below. The only issue right now is that I went on Amazon to check, and they really don't sell the book anymore. They sell it used, but they really don't sell the book, and it's very expensive. So I will throw the link in the description. I don't think it's being made anymore. So, it was going for like over $100, where this is a book that at one point in time costed maybe somewhere between $30 and $40. So I'll throw that in the link in the description. But like I said, in terms of, this is a brand new book, and one thing I do like about this as well, I'm sorry, this is starting to get a little long, but um, it is very up to date. This is, if I'm not mistaken, I looked at the beginning of the book, and it says 2021, I want to say, as far as the dates it was created, first American edition 2021. So what's good about that is that you actually have story arcs in here in relation to things like Perpetua, the World Forge, and the whole thing with the Anti-Monitor and the Monitor being retconned with being the children of Perpetua, whereas in the Crisis on Infinite Earths 85 storyline, Anti-Monitor and the Monitor represented something different than what has been retconned to be now, as they added new story elements. So this is giving you those story elements in those characters when you look them up. In addition to that, you have, you know, it explains the difference between the all the retcons. So, for example, you have the time frame in which you had before, say, Flashpoint, before Crisis on Infinite Earths. Then you have after Crisis on Infinite Earths. Then you have the Flashpoint time frame. Then you have anything that came after that. So you have that kind of reflection of you know the new current stories and how the landscape has changed through alternating time and dimensions to give you the new version. So it would speak on that, like, okay, we had this version, and then we also had this timeline change, Flashpoint change, if you're familiar with the Flashpoint story, and then all of a sudden, um, you had the new 52. It explains all those kind of things. I'm not going to, dive into it too hard because I don't know all the different things that came afterwards, but it lets you know all those kind of different dimensions when you're looking at a character and how that pertained to them. Now, if it didn't really change up their situation that much, it doesn't mention it much. But if it's someone who had a big role in those changes, then it's going to mention that, like here, for example, though I didn't specifically read on Darkseid's character, I read on a few characters, but here you see this is the new 52 version of Darkseid here. And obviously it's going to speak on the times beforehand and then the times afterwards. And what you'll find also is there'll be like usually a little memo. I don't know if I see anyone who's got that here now. Okay, on the record. So you see here where it says on the record. So you'll have a little caption on the side. You see it over here too, on the record. When you see that, it's often going to reference, if you look right here and if you can see it, pretty well. I hope you can a little bit. Let me just zoom in a little bit. So where it says on the record, it says the post-crisis decide. So it'll say post-crisis, or it'll say, something that took place after a certain time frame. And essentially what it's doing is letting those kind of little complicated things in terms of where a person might say, well, with DC lore, why is it that, this doesn't seem accurate? There was this time frame before Crisis or before the New 52, and then you have after the 52, which the New 52 came about because of Flashpoint. And so all that kind of stuff. Well, this gives you a little kind of side note and describes that. And sometimes it will even say it in a way where prior this was the case, but then it's been retconned or changed, or additives have been added to, make it slightly different. So I like that. It gives you a sense of trying to capture, because they know the DC universe is all over the place, and it has a way of trying to capture that in a bottle for you, so you have a bit of understanding on how things work. So I really like that. And it's, oh, look at that, John Diggle. I didn't even know. It's funny. I didn't actually know if he was somebody who was actually a regular in DC Comics, but it says he came out in December 2013, which, if I'm not mistaken, is around the time that the Arrow show came out, because he was a big prominent character in the Arrow show. So that's very interesting. But yeah, so this book I think is very good in regards to, like I said, giving you a basics on the characters, a little bit on their powers, this and that, their pedigree, but also catching you up on current events in terms of the things that happened years ago versus things that are more current, and the characters who are actually greatly affected by that versus the characters who were not. So check that out. There's another character who had a big role in a lot of things in terms of changes that have taken place, Dr. Manhattan, as the Watchmen characters were intertwined into DC. But yeah, so check this thing out. Leave some comments down below if you have the book, if you're looking for a book like this, or whatever the case is, or any other recommendations that you want to put for anybody. Like I mentioned before, link is going to be in the description. And I'll catch you guys in the next video.